Good morning, my name is John with the Pine Tree. I have the great pleasure of being here with Supervisor Tom Tryon.
Hey John, good to see you again.
Hey, thank you for sitting down with us. And I know what we try to do is, since you're the incumbent running, we try to give you the last shot at the interview so you can, it's...
The last shot before burial?
No, no. But one I think is, we want to say thank you. I know, thank you for your years of service. Thank you for running again. And because I think people underestimate the personal investment that it takes to run for public office, and because you become the product you're selling, and I think it's it's a different thing,
Yes. I look at it both ways. I mean, obviously I'm out attempting to sell myself and,
right.
and my political philosophy,
right.
and my position on the issues, but in the final analysis, it's the citizens that decide in the electoral process the outcome.
Yeah.
And the electoral process can be all over the place. I mean, after World War II, the English voted Winston Churchill out of office.
Mm-hmm.
The Venezuelans voted Hugo Chavez into office. The Germans, in a very bad decision, voted Hitler into office. So, a candidate can only, in my opinion, can only do so much. And
right.
I put myself forward with my political philosophy and,
yes.
and my views.
Yeah.
And then it's up to the citizens to decide. And in the end, the citizens decide the government, in my opinion, much more than the candidates.
Understood. Now you have two people you're running against.
That is correct.
And how would you differentiate yourself between them?
Well, let me start with Debbie Pani, because I'm a libertarian, so I have
right.
a very strong philosophical view of government. I think government should be limited, the private sector should be maximized,
mm-hmm.
Regulations, both civil liberty regulations and economic regulations should be minimized. That doesn't mean, that obviously they have to exist to make sure that force and fraud
right.
do not take place in either personal relationships or in economic relationships. But it's not the place of government to direct capital or scarce economic resource. That's the place of the market, of the marketplace. And the marketplace does it through the pricing mechanism, and that's how scarce resources should be allocated, not through government fiat or political fiat out of the state legislature or Congress or the Board of Supervisors.
Right.
So if you want to take sort of my philosophy and say compare it to Debbie Pani's, I find her, for lack of a better term, philosophical approach to be sort of amazing, because she doesn't have one and she doesn't articulate one. And during all these candidate forums and even during your interview, she never, ever expressed any opinion about what the role of government should be in a civil society at all. And if you look, and even in your interview, I sort of feel like I'm running against Obama, Barack Obama in his first terms. If you look at her signs and in her interview, she's all about leadership for a change. She talks about, in your interview, she goes out and talks to the citizens, and the citizens want change. You look at some of her literature on her webpage, etc. It's all about, we're stronger united than divided. We're better when we cooperate than when we argue, etc. But there's no definition of the relationship of the citizen to the government in any of her, and there's no policy. In your interview, she says, I have no particular agenda. How do you run for an elective office at the board or the state legislature or Congress and say, I have no agenda?
Well, I guess to segue...
you have to have an agenda.
Okay, I guess to segue from that into another is, one of the things is, I know that with the redistricting, in past years, you've had the Murphys in
Correct.
your district.
Correct.
And with this year, the boundary is slid down and includes Copper, which in some ways I think makes this, I think the redistricting may have worked this time as far as making more logical. Maybe you can probably have differences of opinion, but anyway. But I know one of the things you've always touted in the past was Murphys, because Murphys has become basically one of the economic engines that's driving the county. What it's developed into. Now, I guess as we segue into the role of government or something, how do you see, because I know a lot of people are really concerned about economics now, how do you see, because I mean with Angels Camp, Copperopolis, you have basically a huge financial portion of the county. As far as their traditional jobs and things like that. I mean, how do you see the role of government in fostering?
Well, let's
change
go
that
to Murphy's, which
Sure.
I view as probably the most prosperous historical community in the Mother Lode.
Right.
And what we did there is we focused on governmental policies and infrastructure. When I was first elected, there was a Design and Scenic Review Committee in Murphy's, and there was a big drive to have an historical district, which would even put more design and scenic review controls on anything taking place. Through much controversy, the board abolished the Design and Scenic Review Committee. We said no to historical districts, though I did say if you want to have your historical building on the register in Sacramento, I'd take that to the board. I would be totally supportive of you as an individual, and I think the Murphy's Hotel is on the historical register.
Right.
So we focused on getting regulations that added nothing to the attraction of private capital to invest in Murphy's. We did away with a lot of those types of regulations, and then we focused on infrastructure. And we went in, and every time we had a significant rain, just about every business on Main Street in Murphy's flooded. So we went in and we put in the rolling gutters so you could park in them. We tore up all of Main Street and redid the entirety of Main Street, and all of these were extremely controversial. And then we came back and we saved the trees, and we came back then with a concept, because Public Works was, and it was interesting because Public Works of the county was adamantly opposed to this, because the ordinance says if you have a commercial building of a certain square footage, then you have to have so much on-site parking. So, well, we can't do that.
Yeah, it was the parking,
And so we did the in lieu parking, and we told all the people they can pay into an in lieu parking fund, and then they don't have to provide on-street parking. And that's been copied not only throughout Calaveras County, but through the other Mother Lode counties now, and that was all. Those were all developed.
And I've heard
basically in
numerous
Murphy's.
times that the parking, the way the parking was structured in Murphy's, although it's somewhat, has been one of the key things to allow it to maintain its historical character.
Because we
still
wanted,
actually
because
grow.
I absolutely wanted to keep Murphy's as a walking community.
Right.
And so we had to have the density downtown, and we couldn't break it up with parking. And park off the streets, and then walk down and walk through the commercial district. And so all that worked, but it wasn't government just controlling everything. We basically got government out of the way, and we made it an atmosphere that was attractive to attract private capital. That's what you have to do.
But without the historical district or the constraints, it was left up to the merchants to decide if their businesses and everything wanted to fit into the historical element of that area. Correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And you go up there and look at the architecture. It's all kinds of architecture on Main Street.
But it seems to work.
Yes, it works.
I mean,
It
the newer
works.
buildings don't detract so much as to maybe just, it works. It
And
works.
some of the older buildings aren't much. I mean, they're just almost wooden shacks like they built in the 1860s. There's no great architecture there to some of that
But
stuff.
even some of the leaning ones actually work pretty good, huh?
And, we went through the big battle of as-is zoning on Main Street. There was a big group in Murphy's that wanted as-is zoning, so that they wouldn't lose the homes, so that if it was a residential on Main Street, it had to stay residential. If it was commercial, it had to stay. And, and I and the county said no, that, people are gonna own those, and we're gonna let the marketplace decide how it will evolve, and whether it will go commercial or whether it will stay residential. And then we had the Arbors project come in, and that was a mixed use, and we had to shoe tree that in through the general plan and everything, because we didn't have anything that handled very well mixed use.
Well, I guess
we worked hard, but
Yeah.
but we made it attractive for private capital to come in and invest,
And it did.
and it did.
I guess the question is how do you see, I mean, where do you see the balance for District 4 as it's configured now to take, I mean, if you're going to look at the business climate, inside the City of Angels is a different beast because it's, inside their boundaries. But I mean, for the rest of District 4, I mean, how do you see improving the economy? How do you see it foster? I mean, how do you see it developing?
Well, I'll get down to sort of what my agenda is, and I think the
Sorry, I didn't mean
the three main things in my agenda are necessary for future economic growth. But we can do a lot of economic growth without these three also. But one's the general plan. We need to get the general plan updated and approved. Anything that requires a consistency finding with the general plan is somewhat in doubt because our general plan is so old and we're not up to state law.
Well, I guess we'll back up and then segue a little bit. And is if people are looking at a different, on the ballot, they see you've been there, you've become part of, you're an institution almost, as far as one of the supervisors there. And I know you said that this is your last campaign. This is the one you wanted.
Yes.
And there's some things that you wanted to get done, achieve in this last. So differentiate those. I mean, as you see, what can a Tom Tryon on the board effectively do different than some of the other people that are running against you in this one?
Well, we need to get the copper community plan adopted.
Okay.
It's not just you have to get a good copper community plan adopted, because you can't hardly do anything in copper until we do so. And that community plan has to be consistent with the general plan. And we don't have a new general plan, so we've got to get the general plan done before we can get the copper plan incorporated into the general plan. So you have to at least have, in the general plan, the copper plan, you have to have the structure that you can entitle business. If you can't entitle the business to come, then they're not going to come, because the entitlement process is a process required by state law. And so you have to have in place the ability to entitle a business that requires entitlements. Not rural home business or working out of your home. Most of those don't require an entitlement, or if they do, it's a ministerial entitlement through an administrative use permit or something like that, which is different than having to find a consistency finding with either a community plan or a general plan. So you've got to get the entitlement. You have to be in a position to entitle when somebody comes in and requests to build and to open a business.
Now,
secondly, you need the infrastructure. Okay, and the City of Angels is very fortunate that they're at the intersection of 4 and 49, so they have a huge competitive advantage. But also, they control the infrastructure. They control their own sewer and water. And one of the really Herculean tasks for the county is to do the infrastructure. But we don't control CCWD. Either CCWD is in charge of the infrastructure on the Highway 4 corridor, or the City of Angels is in charge of their own, or if you go to Murphy's, it's Murphy's Sanitary and Union Public Utility District. And without controlling the other component of the infrastructure requirement, it's very difficult. It sometimes can be a very real challenge to get CCWD on the same page for development as the County of Calaveras. And I can assure you, having been the supervisor for Murphy's for 27 years, just try to get UPUD and Murphy Sanitary to move their boundaries an inch to accommodate growth. And they will say, in terms that you can't use on the tape, no.
Well,
so it gets to be a real challenge if all the governmental institutions that provide infrastructure aren't going to work cooperatively together.
So I guess knowing some of those constraints is how can the government help, because I think we need some short-term job growth and some short-term, what can we do short-term to actually, because I think there's a lot of people, rightly so, that are very concerned about the traditional middle class here in the county, because with the downturn that
middle class here in the county, how about the middle class in the nation? We're getting wiped out, gang.
But
we need a different set of policies.
Locally, what can we do here the next 4 years to foster some of that, to improve the situation?
Well, what you can do while you're trying to get the general plan and the copper community plan, talking just District 4, so you can entitle businesses that want to come in and require a zone change, build a building, do a lot split, et cetera. One of a great one, and you mentioned it earlier, some of your comments are some home businesses that you can work out of your home and say a computer, if you can work out of your home on a computer, or if we could talk a small computer firm to come in and occupy a building we already have, and just come in for a building permit to put some offices in it and change it from whatever its current configuration is. Those kind of things we can do, and they don't require entitlements. And so there's a lot of small businesses, along with, and I keep emphasizing this, we need to keep emphasizing, this is not a request to de-emphasize the successful economic avenues we've already pursued.
Right.
And that's tourism, recreation, et cetera.
Yeah.
The wine. I attended one meeting in Murphy's sponsored by the Murphy's Business Association, and this was, I don't know, maybe a couple of years ago. And their request is that, at that time was that the county ban any further wine tasting in Murphy's because the wine tasting rooms were driving out the art galleries. And I said to them, wait a minute.
That sounds like a Carmel argument or something.
I said, wait a minute, we have empty buildings in Murphy's.
Right.
I mean, how can we be driving something out when we have empty buildings? So I said, no, I would not support that request. But, you get all kinds of people have different ideas, I must say. Boy, you get in public office and you'll hear all kinds of different ideas. Yeah. But we can do more retail. I mean, obviously we need more commercial. We're losing all of our sales tax dollar on the Highway 4 corridor to, not all, but I mean a substantial portion to Tuolumne County. Right. You go to District 2, West Point, River, Flat, Mountain Ranch, San Andres, Moke Hill, they're all going to Amador County. And then you go down at the lower end of Valley Springs, Wallace, Burson. I mean, it's just a short hop to either Lodi, Modesto, or Stockton. Right. And so, as you look at the feasibility reports for opening, say, a small big box store, a Target or something, the county's population is so fragmented by geographical location, geographical limitations. It's hard to have somebody say, oh, here's 50,000 people in Calaveras County. Now, what businesses work for 50,000 people? That doesn't happen because they're so fragmented. I mean, it's hard to pull somebody from West Point or Moke Hill to Angels Camp. Right. It's hard to pull somebody from Valley Springs to Angels Camp. So we have a different set of challenges. But that doesn't mean we don't need to address them, because certainly we do. Right. We need much more commercial. Yeah. There's no arguing that.
Anything else you'd like to add? I mean, if you're looking at to wrap this up here, if you're looking at the absentees are going out, what for another 4 years for Tom Tryon? What's in the
well, I tell you, three major projects, and they're all absolutely necessary for continued economic growth, though there's much we can do in the interim, because everything doesn't require a entitlement. But the first two are the Copper Community Plan and the General Plan. And the third issue that I'm heavily involved in fact, basically initiated, because I made the arguments to include it when we had money and we hired for $125,000 from a lobbying group when the Republicans were in charge of Congress. So that was before the Democrats took over Congress, which I think was midway through Bush's second term. But we got several $1 million in earmarks, for a better term, because that's what they were, for the Wagon Trail project. And that was, there were a lot of people saying, no, we just did the Angels bypass, let's lobby for projects down in Valley Springs or Burson or Wallace, etc. And I carried the day, and we were able to get 3 votes necessary to give a high priority to the Wagon Trail project. And since that, we've been able to move the Wagon Trail project all the way up to where it is today, where it's basically on a fast track with Caltrans, and Caltrans is a partner with us in it. But that's just, to me, that is just a pure infrastructure project. And if you don't support that, then why are we talking economic growth if we can't even get the road infrastructure up to where it belongs? And that's a gap project to boot. I mean, we got the roads fixed on both sides. We're just doing
the last mile, so to speak.
This is the last mile. And let me go back a little bit then, because I want to go back to Debbie's sort of political philosophy or lack thereof. In your interview, she talks about having no particular agenda. It's all about change, going out and talking to the people. And in her written stuff, it's we're stronger united than divided, and cooperation is better than divisiveness, and that sort of thing. But there's no policies. I almost feel like she's sort of become a Nancy Pelosi who said, you're not going to know what's in the healthcare bill until we pass it. It's almost like Debbie saying, well, you're not going to know my political philosophy or the policies I advocate unless you elect me.
Right.
And it's like, well, shouldn't we know that up front? I mean, shouldn't that be the basis of the discussion we're having? It can't be nothing. And then obviously she does have a set of advocacies, a set of policies, and you can tell it by her constituency.
Mm-hmm.
She has all a lot of the ranchers lined up on the Highway 4 corridor, and they are backing Debbie because they think Walter Blaney should pick the alignment for the Wagon Trail project. That process is established under state law. I mean, we had a public hearing process at the beginning, hired a consultant. We are now analyzing 2 alternative routes. That analysis will include a design analysis, engineering analysis.
So we've heard these comments before. On the WAG. So I guess Tom Tryon doesn't.
But then how do you make the judgment? You make the judgment, and then you do the financial feasibility report,
right.
And then it comes back to the board, and you make a judgment. You can't just say one individual gets to pick an alignment. When I was at the Ag Forum,
right.
They had one question at the end only for Tom Tryon, and the other 2 candidates couldn't answer it. And the question was, Tom, if you think a new road or alignment is going to go through a rancher's property, do you think the rancher should decide what the alignment should be? And it's like, of course not. I mean, you have to go through an analysis, and there's state laws and public hearings, and the public gets to have input. And to say, well, the rancher gets to decide which alignment, well, then how about if he says its alignment's not on my property? Do those property owners have then an equal right to veto the project? I mean, you can't just say one individual gets to decide a $50 to $75 million, public project. Nobody gets to decide that. And I think the ranchers have been horribly misled into supporting Debbie on the basis of sort of loyalty and emotion rather than reason.
Well,
because people that know better have not explained to them legally what the process has to be.
So I guess question then in that is to where once a project like the Wagon Trail goes forward and it deems that it has merit, how much local control, so to speak, is there on the exact alignment? None, so to speak?
No, it's not none.
Okay.
There is some. I mean, if it's, they will give a fair amount of discretion to a local recommendation as long as it's not out of line.
Right.
I mean, what would be nice, and of course what's nice rarely happens, but what would be nice is an analysis comes back to the 2 alignments and one is just so clearly superior to the other, it's a no-brainer and we don't have to have a further discussion.
Got it.
Now, if they come back and they're very close, then you're going to have a further discussion.
Yeah.
And the like. But until they come back and the analysis is done, what's the point in having the discussion now?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have no data at all, and it's illegal to select an alignment without going through the process required under state law.
Got it.
So, I don't know. And then you have a second set of constituencies, and I would say that's some of the realtors and angels, and some of the engineers, et cetera, that are upset with my advocacy for larger minimum parcel sizes. And I'm an advocate and brought to the board a request that the minimum parcel size be 40 acres if you're not on sewer and water for a residential home. And there's a bunch of realtors and engineers don't like that. They'd like to have a 5-acre minimum parcel size because then they have more parcels to sell and they can turn them over faster, but it's not good land use policy. And all these larger parcel sizes get built out on roads that aren't adequate, and then the county sort of gets stuck with a whole lot of homes where there's no adequate infrastructure. And the sheriff has a long response time, the fire department has a long response time, you gotta run an expensive school bus system to pick the kids up, et cetera, et cetera.
Is that a fundamental change from what traditionally has been seen as the makeup of the county then, as far as if you run larger?
Yeah, well, yeah, the larger parcel sizes, most of them were either 20 or smaller,
yeah.
down to 5.
Yeah.
And and to me, that's not a good land use policy. We cannot stay up with the infrastructure when you do that, and you can say what you like, but when the wells go dry, they come into CCWD and say, you know, we need water, and they want a grant, and they don't want to pay for it. And then the third constituency, this backing Debbie, and it kind of surprises me, I kind of didn't believe it when it was brought forward to me initially, is there's a certain constituency out there that's basically rallying around Debbie because she's a graduate of Bret Harte High School, and we need to have more sort of local control. And one friend came up and said, you know, the locals are after you, Tom. You know, whether you like it or not, and just because you're fourth generation, you're not considered local. Because I went to high school in Rio Vista, we were weekend warriors. I got into the cattle ranching business about 10 years ago. My father was not a lifelong cattle rancher. He worked as chief industrial engineer for U.S. Steel in Pittsburgh, California. So I've never been quite accepted as local as compared to, say, Debbie, who graduated from Bret Harte High School. Now, I have a lot of Bret Harte High School graduates voting for me, including my children, I hope. But, you know, that has gained some momentum, which kind of surprises me. You know, I don't know quite how one addresses that. But it's sort of interesting, I mean, because this friend that pointed this out said, you know, they feel they've lost the city council to Greenhorn Creek, because I think there's 3 council members from Greenhorn Creek, and my God, they're going to take back the county board of supervisors seat. Well, they're going to control that.
I guess let's steer this in a little different direction, maybe similar to I know that financially and stuff, the last 4 to 5 years have been brutal in the county and stuff like that. What would you look at as far as your tenure on the board, and what would you say some of the achievements have been for the county the last few years? You know, I know.
Well, Murphy's is, you know, Murphy's is sort of the unincorporated city that was in my district until the end of August. Yeah. But Murphy's has done very well through the whole process. They're still, in my opinion, the shining light. Right. So you know, I think that did well. Recreation on the Highway 4 corridor, I think, has held up quite well. Whether it be New Maloney's or coming up wine tasting or going to the caves, Moaning Cavern, etc., Mercer Caverns. You know, the disappointment this last season, or otherwise, I think the Highway 4 corridor would have had a fairly good season in comparison to the economy in the rest of the county and the rest of the rural counties. And that was, we didn't end up with a ski season because we didn't get enough rain. Right. I mean, if we had had a good ski season, we'd have been, you know, we'd have done, in comparison to others and given the economy, we'd have to say, you know, we had a pretty good year. And we need Bear Valley to succeed. I mean, that's a critical component. There are a lot of vacation rentals from Murphy's on up that live off the snow, etc. You know, I don't think the Highway 4 corridor has suffered as much as other areas in the county and in other areas in our adjoining counties. I think we've had I think we've had more sustainable businesses for one thing. And you can't just live off home construction. I mean, you've got to have more than home construction. And you know, for a long time, and all the way up through the housing boom, we were living on home construction. That is not a sustainable economic model. It just isn't. And I'd like to go back to her constituency a little bit, because that constituency does have an agenda, and I would submit that that's Debbie's agenda. And in that constituency, when I pointed out, it was some realtors up here, the Board of Realtors took a vote and did not endorse any candidate or any policy. So I'm not talking about realtors in general or the Board of Realtors. I'm just talking about some realtors locally, and they are upset because of the 40-acre minimum, as I mentioned, and they would like to have smaller minimums so they can cut up more ranches and sell more property. But also they're upset with me over the requirement, which I brought to the board, that you have to demonstrate that you have legal access before you can pull a residential building permit. And that was very controversial, made a lot of engineers angry, made a lot of realtors angry. You know, I remember when we required that before you could pull a residential building permit, or when you pulled it, you had to mark the four corners on your property, and the inspector would go out and make sure that it was number one, on your property, and number two, that you met the setback requirements. And we did that because we had houses, we had one house that was built on the neighbor's property altogether, didn't even cross onto their property. And then we had others that half the house was on it. Well, when we did that, you know, the realtors and the engineers were upset about that. You know, they said, oh, we want a laissez-faire free market economy. If the guy does it, it's his fault, it's his problem, why does the county care? And it's like, well, give me a break. I mean, let's fix it up front, you know? And the same on legal access. I would give you the same argument. I mean, that to me is an absolute no-brainer. And quite frankly, a lot of times I feel like, well, why am I debating with Debbie? I should be debating with Nancy Whittle, because quite frankly, this whole Wagon Trail thing, I don't think could go forward without Nancy's support. And the whole realtor issue up here, I don't think could go forward without Nancy's support. I have some people I know in Copper and say, my God, the real estate agents are calling me from Angel saying, my God, you got to vote for Debbie Pawnee. I said, well, why would they be doing that? Well, this is organized. This is not a spontaneous campaign by Debbie. And if you want to know, you know, where Debbie is, you need to look at her constituency and see who's supporting her and who's sponsoring her. And it's very frustrating. I feel like instead of debating with Debbie, I should be debating with Nancy.
Well, I guess,
Nancy Whittle.
like the 40-acre parcel size, is there any middle ground on that? I mean, is a 20 enough? Is there,
Well,
I mean, is it,
well, why isn't the middle ground 50? I mean, you know, it's like, where do you want to compromise from? I mean,
Well,
I guess it's your starting point.
well, I guess the point was, is that, and I guess, I'm trying to play the devil's advocate here. I guess the argument would be that where there's a lot of people that has traditionally come up here in the past and stuff, is they want to come up to the foothills, build their dream home, so to speak, and lots of times I guess the argument we made that economically, if you had to have a 40-acre parcel to do that, I mean, it makes quote unquote the traditional dream of coming up here and doing that much less accessible, or there's much less.
No, I would disagree. I mean, we were trying to, and the general plan said, we're trying to direct residential development, in fact, development in general where possible, not agriculture, obviously, in the community centers where we have infrastructure and roads, and fire response, and police response, or sheriff response, and ambulance response, et cetera. I don't think my living here in Angels Camp, that somehow my life or style is diminished between here and somebody that's living in Ward 20 or Diamond 20. I mean, I don't think you know, I love it here. I would not wish to move to a 20-acre parcel with just a residential home site and nothing more, or a 5-acre or a 10-acre, because most of these, and you look at most of our code compliance issues, they're all on larger parcels. Rarely do we have one in a community center. I mean, just rarely, not never, but rarely. And it's not an efficient use of land. If you want to preserve agriculture, then you need some larger parcel sizes. We do the surveys and everybody says, well, we want, what the surveys say is basically we want open space between communities. We don't want Copper to meld with Angels. We don't want Angels to meld with Vallecito. We don't want Vallecito and Angels to meld with Murphys, and we don't want Murphys to meld with Arnold. But all we're doing is filling it up with, for lack of a better term, rural sprawl. And that's not agriculture. And it's not open space either. So, you know, I don't think living within the city boundaries of Angels Camp is a bad thing. I love it. I mean, we have big ranches. I could have built this house out on the ranches anywhere, basically. You know, put in a well and a septic and had a beautiful view and all this. I love it right here. The school bus picked the kids up at the foot of the driveway. Denise wants milk in the morning, man. I just jump and run right up to Angel's Food or Save Mart. I mean, it's just wonderful versus living out on the ranch off the Dogtown Road or off the Grade Road or even the home ranch. You know, it's just wonderful. And so I don't view it as sort of a negative to live within a community center. You know, there's no harm, and a lot of people say, well, I want to be out there because I have a horse ranch or I have this or that. Well, we have the ranches and I have the cows, and it's so easy to get up in the morning and drive to them. We have cars. They're not that far away. you know, you can go to any of these ranches and just get in your car and drive.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not the end of the world. In fact, you can have a bigger vineyard if you don't have 3 acres for your home.
Right.
So, you know, the other thing I'd like to just touch on, if I may, just briefly, and that is Debbie's commitment to maintain her full-time job at the assisted living facility. I mean, I don't think anybody can maintain a full-time job working for somebody else and be on the board of supervisors and be effective. I mean, you know, sometimes I feel like her thought process is, well, we meet every other week or twice a month, so I just show up twice a month and that's it. Well, that's not it. I mean, I need a fraction of it. You're on all these other commissions and committees that the board assigns you to. You have constituent meetings. I mean, Marita says she puts 50 hours a weekend. I bet you I put 40 hours a weekend. And you know, and maybe mine's a little easier because it includes the incorporated city of Angels.
Right.
So I just deal with
Right.
with some of the city officials. I don't have to deal with all the citizens
Mm-hmm.
in a direct capacity over governmental policy. But that just, in my opinion, it's not going to work. And you know, she has a husband, David, who's a very good man, and he's retired from Cal Fire, which, you know, as you're aware, probably has the best retirement system on the planet. You know, she worked for the city for I think 8 years, or worked for the city, was on the city council.
Yeah.
City council is much different than the board of supervisors. I mean, you're comparing apples and oranges, and to think that, you know, you're going to get a $45,000 or $50,000 salary from the county while maintaining probably a plus or minus figure salary from the assisted living facility, I don't think that's fair to the constituency. I think this constituency, I think if she is committed to the job, she should announce that she is going to resign from that position. But why would she? She'd make a hell of a lot more money there than you will on the board, and there's no longevity on the board because you can get voted off in 4 years, or you can be recalled in 1.
Right.
So,
Right.
you know, where do you go with it? But that is not a position that will serve the citizens well if she is going to maintain her full-time position, as she has stated in the candidate forms, and she has stated in writing to the residents that she will maintain her full-time position with the assisted living facility.
All right.
So
Well,
that I think will be very difficult for her.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And we've been running here about, what, 37 minutes, so we've been, you know.
We've been hustling through it. Are you a hustler, John?
Not really.
Are you in Minnesota Fats or hustlers?
Well, again, we want to say thank you. Thank you for serving the county. I know it takes a commitment for years and community to do it. And you know, it's
here's John. Why is it 1:45?
something like that.
Is it?
I don't know. Yeah. But in 30 seconds,
Okay.
how would you finish it?
Well, I would just say, you know, this is my last campaign, win, lose, or draw, and if I am successful and the citizens decide to return me to office, this will in fact be my last term. My objective is to finish the general plan and the Copper Community Plan and get the Wagon Trail through to its entitlement phase, where we just have to have funding to build the project. You know, we've been working on these. We're midway through all of this.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very difficult time to basically say, oh, let's make a switch on the board level, sort of like you're in the middle of the creek being shot at, or
Sure.
the middle of the river being shot at. And if you look at the board, composition of the board, Gary Tofinelli's up for re-election, I'm up for re-election, and District 2 is an open seat. I mean, you could have 3 new board members, and then you'd have Marita as the senior member, and Darren Spellman as the second senior member. And if that should happen, then you might as well just start the whole damn process all over again. And we need to get these things through to completion. People can't talk about economic growth, and then we say, well, we can't entitle anything. I mean, that just doesn't work.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Appreciate it.